A funeral train, 6 republics, millions lining the tracks in tears, weeping for a man most of them had never been allowed to criticize out loud.
Tito is dead, and the country he held together for 35 years with prison islands, secret police, and a Hollywood smile is about to tear itself apart.
Within 15 years, the word Srebrenica will become a global synonym for genocide, and the nation these people are mourning will no longer exist on any map.
That is exactly what we are going to break down today. This is History Lens. Let's go back to where this story actually begins, because the fall of Yugoslavia did not start with Tito's death. It started centuries earlier, in a region caught between 3 empires fighting over the same land. The Balkans sat at the collision point of the Ottoman Empire from the south, the Habsburg dynasty from the north, and Russian influence from the east. The people living here were not citizens of their own nations. They were pieces on someone else's chessboard, and each empire stamped a different identity onto them.
The Ottomans converted much of Bosnia to Islam. The Habsburgs kept Croatia and Slovenia Catholic. Serbia became the center of Eastern Orthodox Christianity. Same mountains, same rivers, same general language, but 3 completely different religions, 3 different alphabets, and 3 different stories about who had suffered the most. These were not abstract political disagreements. They were family stories, whispered at dinner tables and passed down for generations, and every major crisis in Balkan history found a way to rip them wide open again.
Every war that later destroyed Yugoslavia in the 1990s followed this exact same fault line.
The first time these tensions exploded on a global scale was June 28, 1914. A 19-year-old Serbian nationalist named Gavrilo Princip fired 2 shots in Sarajevo that killed Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife, and those 2 bullets dragged every major power in Europe
into a war that killed 17 million people.
Serbia came out on the winning side, and in 1918, the Allies helped create the first Yugoslavia, the kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenians. It was supposed to be a partnership of equals, but from the first day, the Croats and Slovenians saw exactly what it was: a Serbian kingdom wearing the Yugoslav mask, with a Serbian king, a Serbian capital, and a Serbian army.
By 1929, Croatian anger had turned into something far more dangerous. A far-right group called the Ustaše formed with one goal: Croatian independence at any cost. In 1934, they delivered.
King Alexander I traveled to Marseille, France, and an Ustaše gunman shot him dead in his open car, captured on newsreel cameras that the entire world watched. His dying words were reportedly, "Protect Yugoslavia for me." But the assassination only deepened ethnic hatred across the region. And when Hitler's armies arrived 6 years later,
that hatred was waiting, ready to explode into one of the most savage episodes of the entire Second World War. Germany invaded Yugoslavia in April 1941 and carved it into pieces. In Croatia, the Nazis installed a puppet state run by Ustaše founder Ante Pavelić. His policy toward the Serbian population was not hidden. It was announced openly. 1/3 of Serbs would be expelled, 1/3 killed, and 1/3 forcibly converted from Orthodoxy to Catholicism. Pavelić built around 40 concentration camps to carry out this program. The largest was Jasenovac, positioned along the railway between Belgrade and Zagreb. Unlike German death camps that use gas chambers, the Ustaše killed with knives, hammers, axes, and bare hands. The confirmed death toll from the memorial site is over 83,000, though Serbian historians insist the true figure is far higher. Here's a detail that most histories of this period skip entirely. The total death toll inside Yugoslavia during World War II reached roughly 1 million people, comparable to the combined losses of Britain, France, and Italy. And a staggering number of those deaths were caused not by the German occupiers, but by Yugoslavs killing each other.
Croats killed Serbs, Serbs killed Serbs and Muslims. A Serbian royalist militia called the Chetniks fought Tito's communist partisans while simultaneously fighting the Ustasha.
Every ethnic group came out of the war carrying fresh blood deaths, and every single family had a specific memory of what their neighbors had done to them.
This is the shattered landscape that Tito inherited when his partisan army liberated Yugoslavia in 1945. He had started with around 80,000 fighters and built the most effective resistance force in occupied Europe. So effective that Britain and America abandoned the Serbian
Chetniks and backed the communist guerrillas instead because Tito was simply killing more Germans. Tito understood that rebuilding Yugoslavia required two things most people would consider opposites: genuine political vision and absolute merciless brutality. His new federation recognized 6 republics: Serbia, Croatia, Slovenia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Montenegro, and Macedonia, with Kosovo and Vojvodina as provinces of Serbia. On paper, it was one of the most sophisticated federal systems in the communist world. Each republic kept its language, its local governance, and a degree of cultural independence. But the entire machine ran on one thing: Tito's personal willingness to crush nationalism the instant it appeared, no matter which group it came from. If Serbian nationalism flared, Tito eliminated it. If Croatian nationalism emerged, he repressed it with equal force. Behind this policy stood one of the most active intelligence services in Cold War Europe, the Yugoslav secret police, known as UDBA, which operated not just inside the country, but across the entire continent. Between 1970 and 1989, UDBA agents assassinated more than 100 political dissidents across Western Europe. Croatian exiles in Germany, Austria, and Australia were tracked, followed, and killed. In 1983, an exiled Croatian man named Đuro Zagajski was lured to a field outside Munich and beaten to death. His murderers were never caught, but decades later, the former UDBA chief, Josip Perković, was sentenced to life in prison. The most chilling instrument of Tito's control was not the secret police, but a place. Goli Otok, meaning the Naked Island, sits 2 miles off the Croatian coast, and from 1949, it served as Yugoslavia's most feared political prison. Around 16,000 people were sent there, most without any formal charges or trial. The welcome ritual was designed to break a person before they reached their cell. Every new arrival was forced to walk between 2 rows of existing prisoners who beat them with fists, rocks, and wooden clubs. Daily life meant forced labor in stone quarries, psychological torture designed to turn inmates into informants, and conditions so brutal that survivors gave the island a bitter nickname: Tito's Hawaii. While his prisoners were being beaten on a barren rock in the Adriatic, Tito himself was sailing past on a 117-meter luxury yacht called the Galeb. This floating palace served as his second seat of government, hosting world leaders and Hollywood celebrities. He befriended Elizabeth Taylor, convinced her husband Richard Burton to star in a Yugoslav propaganda film, and projected an image of glamour that the world was happy to believe. That yacht has recently been fully restored and is now permanently docked in Rijeka, Croatia, as a museum ship, a floating monument to an era that half the Balkans remembers as a golden age and the other half remembers as a prison with nice furniture. It is perhaps the most honest symbol of Tito's Yugoslavia that still exists. Tito's biggest achievement on the world stage was something no leader of a small Balkan nation should have been able to pull off. After breaking with Stalin in 1948, he positioned Yugoslavia as a third way between capitalism and communism, co-founding the non-aligned movement with leaders from Africa, Asia, and Latin America. At its peak, this alliance represented over 100 countries, and Yugoslavia's global prestige suddenly reached levels that had nothing to do with its actual size or economy. Western nations, especially the United States, poured aid into the country to keep it out of Moscow's orbit, and for a while, the bet seemed to pay off brilliantly. Through the 1960s and into the 1970s, Yugoslavia experienced something close to an economic miracle.
Incomes rose, consumer goods appeared, and Croatia's Adriatic coast became one of Europe's most popular tourist destinations. 3 million Western visitors in 1965.
5 million by 1970, 10 million by the late 1980s. A 1964 survey showed 73% of citizens rated ethnic relations as good.
But underneath the tourism numbers, the foundation was rotting. Yugoslavia's system of worker self-management let factory employees vote on their own wages, which created an obvious problem. Workers kept voting themselves raises that had nothing to do with productivity. Inflation climbed steadily, and the government repeatedly devalued the currency to hide it.
By the mid-1970s, over 800,000 Yugoslavs had left the country as guest workers, mostly heading to Germany. Their money transfers home masked a trade deficit so large that at one point, foreign remittances covered over 90% of the gap. Yugoslavia was running on borrowed cash and borrowed time, and Tito, who spent decades punishing anyone who pointed out the cracks, left no one capable of managing what would come next. Tito died on May 4, 1980. His funeral train traveled through all 6 republics, and 500,000 people came to Belgrade to say goodbye. But within a year, unrest erupted in Kosovo, where the Albanian majority demanded republic status instead of remaining a province of Serbia. The rotating presidency Tito left behind proved unable to make even basic decisions. The economy collapsed. Gasoline was rationed. Consumer goods vanished from shelves. Foreign lenders demanded repayment. The only institution that still functioned was the secret police, and some observers noted that it was essentially the only thing preventing the country from falling apart entirely. Into this vacuum walked a man who would light the match. Slobodan Milosevic was a former bank director who understood something with terrifying clarity. Nationalism was more powerful than communism, and whoever controlled the nationalist story would control Serbia. In 1987, during a visit to Kosovo's Serbian minority, he delivered comments so inflammatory that they made him the most famous politician in Yugoslavia overnight.
In 1989, Milosevic stood before a crowd of over 1 million people at the 600th anniversary of the Battle of Kosovo, a medieval defeat by the Ottomans that Serbs had turned into a sacred myth, and effectively declared that Serbian nationalism would be the future. From that speech to the first shots of the Yugoslav wars, the timeline was just 2 years. The symbolic end of Yugoslav unity happened not in a parliament, but in a football stadium. On May 13, 1990, Dinamo Zagreb hosted Red Star Belgrade at Maksimir Stadium. Before a ball was kicked, Serbian ultras began destroying seats and chanting provocations. When police failed to intervene, Dinamo's fans stormed the pitch. Zagreb captain Zvonimir Boban kicked a policeman on live television, instantly becoming a symbol of Croatian resistance against Belgrade. The match never started. For millions of people across the former Yugoslavia, May 13, 1990 was the day the country truly died, not on paper, but in the hearts of the people who had once believed in it. Within a year, the wars began. Slovenia's conflict lasted 10 days. Croatia's war killed roughly 20,000 over 4 years. Bosnia was the catastrophe. Over 100,000 dead, 2 million displaced.
And the massacre of more than 8,000 Bosnian Muslim men and boys at Srebrenica in July 1995 ruled genocide by 2 international courts.
At the 30th anniversary in 2025, thousands gathered at the Podokari Memorial Center, where 7 newly identified victims were finally laid to rest, 3 full decades after their murder.
They are still finding remains in the surrounding hills, still matching bones to names, still burying people whose families have waited a generation just to have a grave to visit.
There is a word for what millions of people across the former Yugoslavia feel today: Yugo-nostalgia. A Gallup poll found that 77% of Bosnians believe the breakup caused more harm than good. In Serbia, the figure is 68%. People who survived the wars look back at Tito's era
And remember free healthcare, free education, a passport that opened doors across Europe, and a sense of belonging to something larger than one ethnicity. The former republics now sit at different stages on an uncertain path toward the European Union. Montenegro leads as the most advanced candidate, with possible membership by 2030. Serbia's progress has been criticized for slow reforms and close ties to Russia.
Bosnia remains so divided that its own political system barely functions. Kosovo declared independence in 2008, but Serbia still refuses to recognize it. The train that carried Tito's coffin through 6 republics in 1980 passed through a country that would not exist 15 years later. The tracks are still there, the stations are still there.
But the borders that now cut across those rail lines were drawn in blood by people who once called themselves neighbors. And whether those borders hold, or whether the Balkans can build something lasting without a strong man to keep the peace, is still the most important. Unanswered question in European politics. Yugoslavia did not fall apart, it tore itself apart. And the difference between those two things is the difference between tragedy and a warning. This is History Lens.